What to do when God doesn't make sense? What do you do when you feel like you've done everything right, but your life is still falling apart? How about when prayer feels like shouting into a void, and your circumstances seem to mock everything you believe about a good and loving God? We often turn to the story of Job looking for answers to why we suffer. But what if Job's story isn't about answers at all? What if instead it's a raw, unfiltered guide on how to worship God when he seems to be silent and your world is in ruins? It teaches us how to cry out in abject frustration while still holding on to a trust that goes deeper than our circumstances. It's a story that gives us permission to not be okay, and it shows us how to find God, not in the explanations, but in the whirlwind of the unknown. To really get this, we have to start with the man himself. The book of Job opens by telling us he was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. Now, this isn't just a casual description, this is basically a heavenly seal of approval. Job wasn't just a good guy, he was the best of them. He was extremely wealthy, a devoted father who was constantly praying for his children, and a pillar of his community. By every earthly and spiritual measure, Job was living a blessed life, a life that seemed to prove the idea that if you do good, you get good. And then in one single gut-wrenching day, it was all ripped away. One messenger, then another, and another came to Job, each bringing news of some new disaster. His livestock, stolen or burned up by fire from the sky, his servants killed, and in the final soul-crushing blow, all 10 of his children were dead, buried in the rubble of a collapsed house. Job's response in that moment is one of the most powerful displays of faith in the entire Bible. He tore his robe, shaved his head, fell to the ground, and worshipped, saying, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." In that moment, Job showed that God is worthy of worship just because of who he is, not because of the gifts he gives. His worship wasn't conditional on his circumstances. God himself was the reason. But the test wasn't over. The accuser, Satan, insisted that Job's faith was only skin deep, that if his own body were afflicted, he would surely curse God. And so Job was struck with agonizingly painful sores from head to toe. His perfect, blessed life had suddenly become a nightmare of horrible suffering. He sat in ashes, scraping his own skin with a piece of broken pottery, a man whose entire world was now just rubble and pain. And it's from this place of absolute devastation that the real lesson begins. After 7 days of sitting in stunned silence with his friends, the dam of Job's stoic faith just breaks. And what follows isn't some polite prayer or a tidy theological argument, but rather it's a raw, brutal, and profoundly human cry of anguish. He doesn't curse God, but he curses the very day he was born. He asks, "Why is light given to those in misery, and life to the bitter of soul, to those who long for death that does not come?" His groans, he says, literally pour out like water. For chapter after chapter, Job just lays his confusion, his anger, and his deep sense of injustice before God. This is not the patience of Job we always hear about. This is the lament of Job. And this is such a critical lesson for us, because the Bible doesn't frame Job's cries as a failure of faith. Instead, it presents them as an expression of it. He isn't pretending to be okay. He's not trying to hide his pain from the great physician. He is bringing his whole shattered heart to the only one who could possibly understand it. Lament is not the same as complaining. Complaining pushes us away from God, but honest lament is a powerful form of prayer that actually draws us closer. It's a profound act of trust. Job's agony isn't a sign he's losing faith. He's directing his frustration toward God, because deep down, he still believes God is in control. He believes God is just, which is exactly why his situation makes absolutely no sense. This gives us powerful permission. When our world falls apart, we don't have to censor ourselves before God because he can handle our questions, our anger, and our tears. Honest lament is a pathway, not an obstacle to a deeper relationship with him. As Job sits in his misery, his 3 friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, start to talk. They meant well, sitting with him in silence for a week, but their words reveal a huge flaw in how they see God. Their argument is simple, and it's a theology that many still cling to today. You reap what you sow. They're working from a simple formula. All suffering must be a direct punishment for sin. So they tell Job, "You must have sinned. Just repent, and God will restore everything." They are so busy protecting their tidy, predictable view of God that they completely miss the man suffering right in front of them. Their theology has no room for mystery, no category for a good person suffering for no apparent reason. To them, if Job is suffering this much, he must be hiding some terrible sin. Their words, meant to be wise, only add to Job's pain, becoming accusations rather than comfort. The story of Job's friends is a huge warning sign against simplistic formulas for faith. They represent the temptation to shrink God down to a manageable transactional being. If I do A, God has to do B. But God is not some kind of cosmic vending machine. The book of Job just shatters this kind of thinking, showing that God's ways are far more complex and mysterious than our neat little boxes can ever contain. Sometimes people suffer not because they're wicked, but because they're righteous. The friend's failure teaches us a crucial lesson in how to care for people in pain. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is not offer an explanation, but to just offer a silent, compassionate presence instead. For 37 chapters, the debate rages on. Job maintains his innocence, his friends insist he's guilty, and Job demands his day in court. He wants to argue his case before God and get an answer to that burning question, why? And then finally God speaks, but the response he gives is not at all what Job or any of us expects. God doesn't answer the why. He never explains the conversation with Satan, never mentions a test, never gives a single reason for Job's suffering. Instead, out of a whirlwind, God answers Job's question with a whole lot of questions of his own. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. For 4 chapters, God takes Job on a breathtaking tour of the cosmos. He talks about the dawn, the oceans, the storehouses of snow and hail, and the stars in the sky. He describes wild and powerful creatures, symbols of a world that is beautiful, but also untamed, chaotic, and dangerous. This isn't God outing Job down. It's God expanding Job's perspective. God's point is basically this: you've accused me of mismanaging my world, but you don't have nearly enough information to make that call. Job can't even begin to grasp the complexity of the physical world, let alone the moral universe and the spiritual battles raging within it. The purpose of God's speech is not to crush Job, but to reveal himself. It shifts the entire focus of the book. The question is no longer, why do good people suffer? The question becomes, who is this God who governs everything? The solution to Job's crisis isn't an explanation of his circumstances. It's an encounter with the character of God. It's a revelation of a wisdom so vast and a power so huge that the need for easy answers just fades away. This divine encounter brings Job to his knees, not in defeat, but in absolute awe. His response is the climax of his entire spiritual journey. He says, I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. Now, he isn't repenting for some secret sin his friends accused him of. God himself already confirmed that Job had spoken truthfully. Job is repenting for something much more subtle, the pride of thinking he knew enough to question God's justice. He's repenting for his tiny perspective in the face of infinite wisdom. This is the ultimate act of worship. It's one thing to bless God when he gives and takes away, as Job did in chapter 1. It's another thing entirely to trust God through relentless, unexplained suffering, and then after demanding an answer, to get only a vision of God's majesty and be satisfied with that. This is the faith that silences the accuser. It proves that a person can love and trust God for his own sake, not just for the stuff he provides. True worship isn't about having all the answers. It's about being so captivated by the who that you can trust him with all the whats and whys you may never understand. God then rebukes Job's friends, telling them they haven't spoken truthfully about him like Job has. He commands them to make a sacrifice, and has Job himself pray for them, a final act of grace from the man they had so wrongly condemned. And in the end, God restores Job's fortunes, giving him double what he had before, more children, a long life, and renewed wealth. But that restoration isn't the point of the story. It's more of an epilogue. The real treasure Job gained wasn't his stuff back, but his new vision of God. So what does this ancient story mean for us today, when we find ourselves lost in our own suffering, when God feels distant and his plan makes no sense? First, Job's story gives us permission to lament. It teaches us to be brutally honest with God. Don't run from him. Run to him with your pain, your questions, and your frustration. He can take it. Voicing your struggle isn't a sign of weak faith. It's a bridge to a more authentic relationship. Second, it invites us to shift our focus from why to who. We may never get a satisfying explanation for our pain on this side of eternity. But like Job, we can seek an encounter with the character of God. We can choose to stand on what we know is true about him, that he is sovereign, wise, and good, even when our circumstances are screaming the opposite. Trusting God's heart when you can't trace his hand is the very essence of a resilient faith. Finally, remember that the pain is not the end of the story. Job's suffering was temporary, but his encounter with God was eternal. His ordeal was a refining fire, meant to purify his faith and give him a more profound vision of God. When you feel trapped and your way is hidden, remember that you are being held by a God whose ways are much higher than our own. He is writing a story that is so much bigger than what we can see right now. The book of Job doesn't offer a neat solution to the problem of pain. It offers something that's so much better, a God who meets us in our pain and reveals that he alone is enough. If this message struck a nerve or made you think, please share it with someone who might be walking through what seems like an impossible season. And in the comments below, I'd be honored to hear your own thoughts on how you've learned to trust God when he doesn't make sense. Thank you for watching.